Chapter 6. This is the third time I've read it. Like Chapter 3. I'll have it memorized. It's a shorty. Chapter 6. The two men were still in shock as they walked back to the truck. "What do we do now?" Mark asked Jim. "Let's talk about it while we're getting the fuel," Jim suggested. Mark drove the truck over to the fuel tanks, and he filled up the truck while Jim worked on the jerry cans. They thanked Todd and Tom again when the pair stopped in the flatbed to say goodbye and remind the friends to lock the gate. Jim really wanted to see if he could get his truck fixed, so they decided to go back to the auto parts store to try to get the parts. After they locked the gate, Mark drove to the parts store he'd gone to yesterday with Tom. They noticed that most of the small mom-and-pop stores were open, and that most of the big chain stores were closed. When they got to the auto parts place, Mark thought it best for him to stay in the truck with the money. He gave Jim a list of parts he wanted for the truck and the Jeep. Jim was in the store for about 20 minutes. When he came out, the shop owner was helping him carry out some bags. The owner shook Mark's hand and then handed him a small box. "This is the glow plug controller for your truck, but I don't know if the burst got to it or not. If you'll just sign this invoice for it, you can pay me later or bring it back if it's no good," he told Mark. "Let me pay you for it," Mark argued. "I don't like to owe people." "No, I insist," the parts man said. "I owe Tom and your company so much. If it wasn't for people like y'all, I might not be in business. Your friend paid me for everything else, but I won't take money for a part that might not be good." "Thank you," Mark said as he signed the invoice. "No problem. You fellas just come back if you need anything else." Jim climbed back into the truck and thanked the parts man one more time. They backed out of the parking lot and headed back to Jim's truck. Jim explained to Mark that the parts store owner had told him that the computer on the 91 Chevy only controlled the spark advance and the fuel mixture for the throttle body. He said Chevrolet had been making basically the same small block motor since 1955, and that lots of the parts were interchangeable over most of those years. He sold Jim an aftermarket performance intake manifold and carburetor and a vacuum advanced distributor with everything he needed to convert his truck. He told Jim how to install the parts and told him it should only take 2 or 3 hours. Jim figured the money for the new parts was wasted if the lights came back on, but if they didn't, it was a good investment. It was worth the gamble to make sure he had transportation, he figured. When they got back to work, he pushed Jim's truck into the shade, pulled the toolbox out of Mark's truck, and started to work. "Do you think Todd's right about the power?" Mark asked. "I don't know. Like you said, he's the third one to say it. Gunny's kind of a conspiracy theorist, so I take everything he tells me about that kind of stuff with a big grain of salt. But sometimes he's right. I thought Scott was a complete nut job at first, but he seemed pretty normal when he came over last night and helped us. And now Todd tells us the same thing. We know he's intelligent, and I've never known him to lie. Heck, I can't ever remember him being wrong," Jim rambled. "What do you think about joining their group?" "Well, Lisa's not going to like it if we can't have her parents out, but we have to at least go see the ranch." "I agree. The way I see it, we have 3 ways to go. First, if Todd's wrong, then we just go back to the way things were. But if he's right, then we could go to the ranch or we could stay right where we are. You and Lisa are welcome to stay with us as long as you like, and it wouldn't be a problem for her parents to stay either. Heck, if we have to start raising our own food, I'd kill to have her dad's expertise." "Thanks, Mark. If the power stays off, I don't think we'd want to be in town. I agree with Tom and Todd on that at least. If things go back to normal, or if we go stay at the ranch, we don't really need anything. But if things go bad and we stay at your place, what do we need?" "Man, a ton of stuff. Fuel, gardening stuff, canned food, building materials, fencing, animals, ammo, medical supplies. I can't even imagine what all we might need. When we get back to your house, we can sit down with the girls and make a list. They're about twice as smart as we are anyway," Jim said with a grin. "They're not that smart," Mark retorted. "After all, they married us." After 2.5 hours, Jim tried to start her. The Chevy seemed like it wanted to start, but just couldn't quite fire. Mark got a wrench and loosened the new distributor. He turned it counterclockwise about 20 degrees. "Try it now, Jim." Jim hit the starter and the engine roared to life. Hot damn, it runs. What did you do? I just retarded the timing a little bit. It sounds like the idle circuit on the carb needs adjusting. Hand me a regular screwdriver. Mark made a few adjustments to the carburetor and the new distributor, then replaced the air cleaner. Jim pulled the truck over to the gas storage tank, and they topped off his tank. Mark was glad they'd gotten Jim's truck running. It was lifted and had 35-inch tires on it. It would go almost anywhere the Jeep would, but unlike the Jeep, had the capacity to carry a decent load. It also had a winch on the front that was useful for many chores. It would make their lives easier having two running trucks. What now? Mark asked. Feel like working on another truck? I bought the parts for Gunny's truck. Plus, I think I want to get the rest of my guns and clean out our cupboard. Okay. His should be easy to fix next to yours. While I'm working on it, you can get what you want out of the house. Jim led the way, and he went through the bad neighborhood. Mark wished he'd gone the long way. He wondered if Jim remembered how much money he had in the truck. He reached down and made sure the Colt was in a position where he could get to it with the seatbelt on. Mark noticed that there were more people out and in larger groups than the last time he drove through here. He was nervous. No one tried anything, although the two running vehicles received a hard look from more than one of the groups. When they got to Jim's house, Jim backed his truck into the driveway and Mark backed in right beside him. He figured Jim might have more than his truck would hold. About the time Mark got out of his truck, Gunny came limping out of his house. Hey, Jimbo, he called. You got that sissy wagon running, huh? Yeah, Gunny, Jim answered. Mark helped me fix it. Ah, karate man. You good with the wrench, too? You better hope so, Gunny, Jim said. I bought some parts for your old truck, and Mark's going to try to fix it for you. Really? Yes, Gunny, Mark said as he pulled his toolbox out of the bed of his truck. Should we get started before it gets too hot? Whatever you say, karate man. Mark worked on the old Dodge while Gunny paced and fretted like an expectant father. 30 minutes later, the engine was resurrected and Mark topped off Gunny's gas tank. Gunny was so happy he shook Mark's hand until his shoulder joint was almost worn out. Then Mark went to see how far along Jim was. When he got into the house, Jim just about had all the canned and dry food in boxes, so Mark started carrying them out to the trucks. When all of the food was loaded, Jim opened his safe and put all of his long guns in cases and placed them in the extended cab of his truck. Then he got all of the pistols and revolvers already in cases or boxes and stacked them on top of the rifles and shotguns. His ammunition was all in metal GI ammo cans that were clearly labeled as to what was in them. These he placed in the bed of Mark's truck, as the back of his was quite full. When they were getting into the trucks, Gunny came out of his house with a box of his own. Here are some books you guys might find useful, Gunny offered. Mark looked down in the box and saw a series of books called Foxfire and a large book named Back to Basics. Mark didn't really want to take the books, but he didn't want to hurt the old man's feelings. Thank you, Gunny, Mark said as he took the box. Listen, yesterday you said the lights won't be back on for quite a while. Why do you think that? That EMP is some bad shit, Gunny started. We studied it in the Marines. It cooks everything electrical unless it's protected. All our trucks and radios and stuff had special parts that were supposed to be EMP-proof. I just don't see how there's any way they can fix all the damage that the burst did in 2 or 3 days. It'll take months, at least. But the vice president is saying that they can do it, Jim argued. Jimbo, you have a tendency to hear what you want to hear. You remember the president who said, "Read my lips"? I believe that president, but that didn't make what he said true, now did it? Most folks around here think bread, milk, and eggs come from the grocery store. They have no idea how, or even the means to provide for themselves. When the grocery store shelves are empty and the faucets won't run, the shit is really going to hit the fan. The VP is just trying to postpone the inevitable, I suppose. Now you boys get going, you hear? Gunny, here's a map to my house. If things get bad, you come on out, okay? Gunny took the map, looked at it, then handed it back to Mark. I appreciate that, karate man. But you boys don't need a broken-down old geezer like me to worry about. Now scoot before I put a boot up your ass. With that, he did an about-face and marched into his house. Oh, bad.